overview.
I think you need to explain it.
So this is a Spiderfoot reconnaissance tool that looked at DominionVoting.com network that was analyzed on November 3rd. And basically this shows vulnerabilities. It shows volumetric internet traffic, the raw data. It shows all of the web server's physical coordinates, all the vulnerabilities that are associated with the server. But basically, it does show that this was connected to the internet on voting day, and the volume of traffic was significant, and the vulnerabilities there are plenty of vulnerabilities that hackers could penetrate the system.
Can you tell if some of those communications went outside the United States?
We did observe packet traffic that were going from the U.S. Now, we don't know if it was specifically Dominion traffic going, but to a server in Frankfurt.
In Frankfurt, Germany.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
And who has it?
Could Colonel Waldron, could you just take a moment and explain packet traffic? Because there's probably a lot of folks who are not sure what that is.
So it's bits of information that are sent over the internet from internet protocol from one point to another.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's in Frankfurt, Germany that would be of interest?
Well, we looked prior to the election, one of our white hat hackers, and found that there was traffic in a Seidel server. Seidel is one of the companies, and I can show you we mentioned before the interconnectedness. Not that one. The interconnectedness of these companies. So this is sort of a historical link to all the voting companies, and we got Smartmatic in the middle. It's a licensor to Dominion Voting Systems. Seidel runs election night reporting through SOE software and Clarity Elections over here. And Clarity Elections is, if you click up on a lot of the county and Secretary of State voting systems, it'll pop up as property of Clarity Elections. So it doesn't really belong to the counties. It doesn't really belong to you. It really belongs to Clarity Elections.
I mean, just to make it simple, a Dominion machine that I go in and vote, it is susceptible to easily having that vote changed from the outside, or by them in particular.
By an authorized user or an unauthorized user.
By an authorized or unauthorized user?
Correct.
As
a
well?
Hacker. A hacker.
A hacker. So my vote is only as good as the integrity of Dominion and all the hackers that exist that can get into the Dominion machine.
Your vote is not as secure as your Venmo account.
Pardon me?
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was probably one of the most riveting parts of yesterday's hearing in Arizona, that your vote isn't as well protected as a Vimeo video. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight the man who was used by God to put together that hearing so that the world could hear what Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis have been saying for a long period of time, and also Sidney Powell, that we have been corrupted. A fraud has taken place, an election has been absconded with, and it's going to be up to the states to make a difference. I want to introduce to some and present to others Representative Mark Finchem, the Arizona House of Representatives, the legal district or the legislative district number 11. You can find him at Mark Finchem. Mr. Finchem, thank you so much for your service to our country by having that yesterday. It came under the great duress that you were being slow walked in Arizona by the state legislature, and as well you were being criticized hostilely on the outside. In fact, there was one witness who had their Twitter account silenced as a result of testifying. Why did you put up with this? Why did you go through with this particular hearing yesterday?
Well, because the only thing we have to lose is the republic itself. I mean, it's that simple. And, as far as Twitter goes, I don't play on Twitter a whole lot. If I'm serious, I might every once in a while peek out there.
Yes.
But if I do is it a tweet? A
Tweet
tweet
or-
a week.
I don't know, man.
If I do a tweet a week, that's a lot.
Exactly.
So my sister-in-law texted me today. She says, "Hey, you need to get out on Twitter, man." What do you mean? Well, you used to have 600 followers. Yeah. You got over 12,000 now.
Yeah.
I'm like, is that a good
You're a
thing?
hero.
Or is that what? Well, I do participate out on Parler,
Yes.
but not very much because I believe in living my life in the real world, not in the fictitious world.
Exactly.
And I think people have a tendency to live in a bubble when they just engage with people in a certain space. Now, between Parler and I think there's a replacement for Facebook out there called MeWe or something like that.
And also Gab.
I've kind of I ventured out there a little bit, but quite honestly, sir, I don't have time to do that.
Exactly.
I have a lot of constituents that are asking me questions, and I try to put out a journal at least once a week. I haven't been able to get it out in the last 2 weeks because I've been so busy assisting the Giuliani team with investigations and with running down leads in southern Arizona, and then, of course, putting together the hearing. So,
Exactly.
I try to live my life real time, and I think that's one of the reasons that God has prepared me for such a time as this.
Yes.
I don't have the luxury of being distracted by people who might badmouth me, people who might try and undercut me, people who might be obstacles. And as I put this in my mind's eye, it's kind of like water flowing downhill. It will take the path of least resistance. It will find the path of least resistance. And if that means that we have to raise money to do something privately that should have been held in a public building, that's fine. Now, I will say this,
Yes.
that there was actually an upside to this, that by going to and by the way, the Hyatt Regency folks, they were so gracious to us, absolutely gracious. And the minute the hearing was announced, they received all kinds of threatening phone calls, and their corporate office said, "Hey, what's going on?" When you're fighting Satan, he always wants to try and get in on what's going on. But the moment that we decided to move forward with this, there was this very interesting move of God.
Yes.
I don't know if you know who Dutch Sheets is or not, but Brother Sheets put out there was a huge prayer meeting at one of the Assembly of God churches up in Peoria that I had the privilege of attending.
Yes.
And he said, Arizona is going to be shaken to its foundation. It will be shaken. Mm-hmm. And I texted, my pastor, and I said, you might want to tell Dutch, I think his prophecy came true.
Yeah.
Because what we were able to present had a lot of people extremely nervous. And we had set up, what a lot of folks don't know is we had set up a Zoom call so that legislators who weren't on the panel, who might have taken a dim view of what we were doing, that they could surreptitiously watch what was going on. Yes. And of course, we had a public feed and all that. And I had a chat room set up so that if they had a special question that they wanted to get inserted, that we could ask that question. But the number of people that were on that were between 15 and 30 all day long. Interesting.
Wow.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
And we had maybe half a dozen legislators who were actually in the room. But where I was going with this is our hearing room would only accommodate probably 25 to 30 people. Mm-hmm. We were able to get over 160 people. Well, no more than 160 people in the room.
Exactly.
We actually had more people that could be present, and I would equate that with greater transparency.
And yesterday was a rock and roll moment. It was a legendary moment. The people of God, forgive me for saying so, but it's true. The people of God got a chance to take on the state, and that has not happened since March. during the course of the pandemic. So, Representative, there are those who are watching at home who their first question is, how come there are no Democrats on that panel? How come the Democrats are not involved? How come they don't ask any questions about this? If you could give an answer for that, sir.
I think the simple answer, perfectly happy with the outcome.
Okay.
That's simple.
Have you heard of any Democrats who have been complaining about voter suppression or obstruction in terms of the vote in Arizona?
So I don't look at the world as Democrat and Republican.
Yes.
I think the better question to ask is, what types of voter frustration are there out there? And in many cases, voter suppression manifests itself as voter nullification. Right? So let's say, for example, you have 10 ballots that were not legitimate ballots shoved into a tabulation machine.
Yes.
You just disenfranchise 10 people.
Yeah.
You don't know who those people are, but that is every bit as serious as somebody standing outside the polls with a baseball bat, like it happened in Philadelphia in the last election. That's every bit as serious as somebody standing there threatening a voter.
Now,
every bit.
You grew up in Detroit. You were raised in Detroit. You became a law enforcement
Well, actually,
officer.
I was born in Detroit, but for the most part, raised in agricultural land in West Michigan.
Okay.
Kalamazoo is where I graduated from high school. So if we use our map, right there
Way
is
down
where I
there.
spent most of my time. Okay.
Exactly.
And Detroit obviously is over
Way
here.
over there.
You know, actually over here, downriver Detroit, kind of here. So I did not grow up in Detroit, thank God, and grew up in a great West Michigan. The West Michigan I grew up in was pretty hardcore Republican. In fact, the ranch that I had outside of Michigan, between Kalamazoo and Battle Creek, was on the course of the Underground Railroad. And my parents saw to it that I got a pretty good education when it came to American history, and have a great appreciation for towns like Tecumseh, Delton. I mean, our community is where so many fled the South.
Yes.
To
Very
move
much
north
so.
and get away from slavery.
Exactly.
So it just occurs to me that when you talk about voter suppression, those are the things that come to my mind. It's like, do we want to be a slave to oligarchs who are the election that we just had usually is prosecuted with about $50,000 per candidate.
Yes.
This year, the Democrats spent $500,000 against me,
Wow.
and I spent $62,000.
Wow. And they still call you representative. It's amazing.
They still call me representative.
Money does
Well,
not
and I think
buy
that one of the things that does is it proves that message beats money
Yep.
when you have an informed electorate. Now, my particular district is very well informed. It's a big mix of agricultural, business leaders. There are areas that are very affluent, and there are areas that are quite rural. In fact, we kind of joke around. We have more cows in our district than we do people. That's okay. I'd much
perfect.
rather argue with a cow than a person.
Any given day. Representative, there are those who are watching at home tonight who were uniquely concerned about the well-being of the overall election, and then they heard Colonel Waldron speak of the fact that there's a potential millions of votes that were transferred from Donald Trump to Biden or illegally placed through. I wanted to get your thoughts based on what you heard. Were you rattled at all by that particular conception? And as well, in addition to that, why did Arizona choose Dominion, Smartmatic, and Signal software?
That's a great question. So Arizona did not. Every county in Arizona, we have 15 counties. Every county is free to choose the equipment and the ballot stock, the software that they use for tabulation. They're free to choose that. Now, I can guarantee you that we'll be looking at that in this next session and trying to gain some uniformity. And also, probably to take a look at it, similar to the way Texas has managed the problem. And the Texas legislature had I believe, a subcommittee that reviewed Dominion and their software and prohibited the use of it in their state because of the potential for fraud. Now, I'm already investigating some technology, some nanotechnologies. Some of them you see in the newer $100 bill that's got the stripe that goes through it.
Yeah.
Our biggest issue is chain of custody.
Yes.
And what Colonel Waldron's work did, and then you add with that the work that Dr. Shiva presented, those two presentations worked off of each other. They came to the same conclusion, but by different routes, which I think was very, very interesting. The fact that when Dr. Shiva made his presentation, he said, this is what the slope of your election looks like. This is exactly counting your votes over time to the end where you said, okay, we're done counting. Here's what's interesting. The only way that you could build a model to meet that slope was by giving 130% of Democrats voted.
100.
Think about that for a minute.
30% of Democrats.
That means 30% voted more than once.
Wow.
Or 30% of them were fictitious votes. That's the only way that they could get the model to match actual behavior.
So when is the question, did they do that?
Over time. Well, there's a couple of different, it depends on where you were at. Okay. There were 3 different ways to do this, and this came out in testimony. You can either preload it, or you can have an algorithm that releases certain amounts of votes at certain times. There's a trigger feature.
Yes.
Or you can do a major dump. And that's one of the things that was sworn to in testimony, that in the final hours, when Joe Biden was getting just crushed, there was a major dump. Well, here's the interesting part. The major dump exceeded the physical capabilities of the equipment that count the ballots. Okay, so in my past as a 21-year trooper out of West Michigan, DPS officer, that's called a clue.
That's a clue.
So I'll tell you what, let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah, that's a major clue. And, the fact that I'm glad that Colonel Waldron brought up packet transfer.
Yes.
Because what that's telling us is that regardless of what Dominion claims, we had voting information leaving the United States, going to a server. It was altered and returned.
Exactly. Listen,
okay.
we had Major Paul Vallely on last night, who confirmed.
Good man.
Yes, that at least 5 soldiers were killed in terms of recovering that server software from Frankfurt, Germany, in a tete-a-tete versus the CIA. And how is it that what you learned yesterday, what we know today in terms of affirmation from Vallely, from McInerney, and from Flynn and Sidney Powell, why isn't the state legislatures just erupting at this point, saying, throw out the ballots altogether and we shall vote our electors?
So the first notice I got about the disclosure that 5 soldiers were killed was about 2 hours ago. Now, not a surprise because I've been kind of nose to the grindstone since yesterday.
Yeah.
And had meetings today in order to try and get us to a place where we can either subpoena and impound or somehow get our hands on the machines that are in one of the counties that we want to study. I think we made some progress on that. And I think that there's a certain amount of trepidation on the part of members, and I understand it. I really do. That they are very fearful that if we go to the step of declaring the election a fraud, somebody can make the argument that you're disenfranchising voters by doing that.
Yeah.
Well, the counter argument to that is if we don't do it, we have voters who have been disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
so I mean,
well-
no matter what we do, people are going to be able to make that claim.
Exactly.
But that's why the 12th Amendment exists. And the last use of that, just a short history lesson, 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Tilden. We had 3 states that said, we are not going to release our electors. Not going to do it because there's so much fraud here. We cannot untaint the election.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably what will end up happening in Pennsylvania. Because if you go to court, you got to go to court with a case that has some specific relief. Okay, so the court can look at the voting pool, the number of votes that were cast. Okay, which ones are fraudulent? And we'll just back those out. Well, it's a ridiculous notion because we have an anonymous voting system.
Yes.
So you can't do that. And if you can't separate the fraudulent votes from the legitimate votes, all you can do is say, this is so corrupted that we're going to have to rely on another constitutional tool. And I'm so glad that you brought up that we're a constitutional republic and not a democracy. Forefathers, our framers planned for this. They knew that at some point, corrupt men would attempt a coup of the people. And that's what disturbs me the most.
Yes.
This is not a coup of President Donald Trump. And he said something that has stuck with me, and I think he's spot on. They're not after me. They're after you. I'm just in the way. So whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, you should be terrified of what is being done to this country in the pursuit of power by people who own, I'll say his name, Jack Dorsey, guy that owns Twitter. Guy's a criminal in my mind. Mark Zuckerberg, criminal in my mind. So when you try to buy an election like they tried to do with my seat, I'm sorry, it's not my seat.
Yeah.
The people's seat in LD11, I just happen to be sitting in it for the next 2 years. When you have oligarchs that decide they want to buy that and own that, you got to ask the question behind that. Why? Well, is it just so that they can have a blue state and be able to say, oh, we turned the whole country blue? I don't think so. There's another agenda at work here. And that agenda is control. We've got a state statute that we're going to have to try and overturn that allows the governor of this state to mandate vaccinations.
Yes.
Here's one for you. Hashtag you first. I'm not putting anything in my body that has fetal body tissue from an abortion because I think it's going to make me better. And here's this is a great meme, by the way, that's out there. It's Nicolas Cage asking the question. So let me get this straight. 99.8% of people survive COVID-19, but you want 100% of the people to get a vaccination. Think about that for a minute.
Exactly. And we've seen the abuses of the Constitution, and a lot of people are saying, and we'll just take the Arizona Constitution for sake, because we've had Kathleen Wynne of the Women's Federation on. We've had Williams.
Man, you know a lot of good people.
Yeah.
I'm friends with Kathleen. Yeah.
Exactly. Listen, this show, my television network, is geared to get the truth out there because the rest of the media won't. And so when you're talking with these Americans and they're saying, our Constitution prevents us from doing that which is right. And I'm sitting here and I'm flabbergasted. How can your Constitution stop you from overturning an election, if you would?
So we have a set of rules, and I've been harangued and banged on by some of the talk radio shock jocks.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we either choose to be a nation that is governed by the rule of law or not. And if we step outside of the law that exists, we have just become Venezuela.
Yes.
We've just become El Salvador. Now, I might not like the law, the fact that we can't just call ourselves into session for whatever reason, that we're not a full-time legislature, that we don't, whatever the issue may be. But when there is law on the books that are the rules, that's the contingency plan for when things go sideways. That means if there's nothing in the law that addresses a situation, then the legislature is empowered to act. So let's walk through that for just a moment.
Yes.
In Arizona, in order for the legislature to call itself into order, into session, special session, you have to have a 2/3 majority of both the House and the Senate of members. Well, that's not going to happen because we're a 31-29 House. We have 60 seats. Republicans hold 31 seats. Democrats hold 29 seats. Over in the Senate, it's something similar. It's like 17-13. A little bit better ratio, but two of the individuals are no longer in office because they basically got kicked out.
Wow.
Yeah. So under the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, it calls on legislatures around the various states when you need to step in and do your one duty, and that's to make sure that you're representing your state and that you name electors to the Electoral College. We are not tethered, and this is a legal theory that has been supported by just a plethora of constitutional law attorneys. We can't be restricted as a legislature by laws in the state when we are working in the federal sphere.
Yeah.
That means that we can call ourselves to order with a simple majority. We're not bound by state statute or state constitution that limits our authority, because that authority is plenary. There's nobody else listed. There's no governor, no judge, nobody. That's up to every legislator to steel themselves, put on the full armor of God, and step into the battle.
Now, a lot of people don't ask this question, but I want to in this regard. I have the opportunity of talking with Representative Finchem with us tonight. And the concept that you overturn the federal election, how does that weigh in terms of the state election? If the 90% were disenfranchised because the 1% disenfranchised the 10% with their corruption, how do you have a Senator Kelly? Tell me, Maricopa County, the largest.
I'm glad you asked that question.
Largest
There's a lot
Republican
of people right now that are
venue.
asking that very question.
How can you have a Senator Kelly when you know Maricopa County is not blue? It's never been blue, never will be blue. It's a red area. How?
So part of that is, for those listeners that have got a military background, part of it's a psyop. So you've got the media that's been saying, it's going to be a close race. It's going to be a close race. And then you have software that allegedly makes it a close race. And, oh, gosh, your candidate lost. Really? I think that's that bears some scrutiny. That's worth looking into. So that's one of the interesting things about this software is that down ballot races from the presidency all the way down to dog catcher can be corrupted simultaneously.
Yes.
So it could be, And by the way, this has been in use since before 2014. So what's the possibility that the state of Arizona, because there have been some close races, we've had some congressmen that they maybe shouldn't be congressmen.
Yeah.
We've had some races that, for example, in the state legislature, could it be that we have actually seen the very thing that we're seeing now working in past elections? But I think you've asked a very good question, because we have 11 seats. We're probably going to pick one up, if not two, when the census comes into play. So we've got congressional seats, we've got Senate seats, and then thank God we don't have state offices that were up, statewide offices like governor and secretary of state and all that. But even in that, I mean, there's something that's not quite right about our last gubernatorial election. We had, Governor Ducey. Whether you're a fan of his or not, doesn't matter. The guy ran up 17 points against his competitor. Now, his competitor just happened to be a really bad candidate, but we lost the superintendent of public instruction by 2 or 3 points, and we lost the secretary of state by 2 or 3 points. We won the attorney general by 3 to 4 or 5, maybe 5 points. How did the governor score a 17-point advantage?
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
But it's that election is it's more. There's no way we'd ever be able to research that unless, of course, we found the servers where that was at. That'd be great to know. But I think if we look real time right now, it's speculation in the rearview mirror. Real time, I would urge Senator McSally, don't be so fast. Don't be so fast. We're trying to do as much research as we can, as fast as we can. But I don't know the legal theory of this, and I haven't researched it.
Yeah.
But it does beg the question that if you find out after somebody has been seated in the U.S. Senate that the election was a fraud, can you call them back and say, this isn't your office?
Well,
We're kicking you out.
According to the Constitution, the state legislature has that role and responsibility.
Well, we have that role when it comes to appointing electors for the president. This is new legal territory, because you have to stop and think about this. Who was our Constitution written for? A righteous and moral people.
Exactly.
It is suitable for none other. So, and that's one of the things that I've been talking about for the last 10 days. In Arizona law, it does not contemplate fraud for elections. There's not a word about it. There is no mechanism legally in the law to fix a broken election. When I'm going to say a fraudulent election. So, for example, and this is just one potential, we find the election to be fraudulent. Okay, now what? Well, when it comes to the presidential election, the legislature can pick electors. But what if it's a fraudulent election that created legislative seats or congressional seats that are filled by somebody that shouldn't have been? Okay, does that mean then that you have a statewide that the sitting legislature orders a total new election in February, which would be a special election at great cost to the people? But wait a minute, if it's run the same way as the election we just had, you're going to get the same result. I think Einstein called that insanity.
Yeah, that's insanity. But
okay, so
yeah,
and we have a lot of people who have basically said, and we're not there yet, but I would like to know from the voters, to protect your voting franchise, would you be willing to give up mail-in voting? It's where the fraud occurs.
exactly.
And the electronic reassignment of votes. Because if we go to voting at the polls with a ballot, you stick the ballot in the machine, it counts, you verify, yes, that's who I voted for, and you leave, and it doesn't need to be connected to the internet, folks.
Yeah.
Once the machine is full, the machine turns itself off and waits for somebody. Now you'd have to have additional machines or storage capacity, whatever that might be. That's something you can plan for. But that system right now doesn't exist in the state of Arizona. We'd have to rebuild a system. But I'm all for going back to polling on polling day. In fact, I'd even look at the idea of voting starts on Saturday, and you can vote on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday morning, you start to count ballots. That way, you're serving the people who are working all week. They can do it on the weekend. The people who have to work on the weekends, they've got a day during the week that they can vote. I mean, it solves for a whole bunch of problems.
Exactly.
But the issue that you have to have is chain of custody on every single ballot.
But
You've got to lock that thing down.
You know, the state legislature can send a note to Mitch McConnell, who would be the Senate majority leader, and tell them not to seat at all Kelly. You could do that, right? Just like that. Got a great question. And there goes the... it's 10 o'clock anyway, ladies and gentlemen, and I do apologize. That young lady right there is coming on. Jane, I had a serious question. Here we go. Jane, hold off, Jane. Don't come on yet. Listen, could the state legislature tell Mitch McConnell, don't seat Kelly until we certify a non-disenfranchised election? Could that happen?
That is a legal theory I'd have to research. But it occurs to me that there is no black letter law that gives us guidance on what we might do. Because, like I said, there's no law that deals with voter fraud and a contested election like that in Arizona law. So the legislature would have to make it up as they go, quite frankly.
Take a look at South Carolina when the first black representative was elected. The thing that was done by the South Carolina legislature is that they sent a note to the House and told them don't seat that gentleman, and he was not seated for 2 years. So I think you can do this. You can do this. How can people get in contact with you? How people can support what you're doing, sir? Okay. There we go. Representative Mark Finchem, Legislative District 11, Arizona House of Representatives. Listen, I've enjoyed talking with him. We're going to make certain that we have an opportunity to bring him back on the air. His voice is vital. I had questions about Giuliani and but this young lady is coming up in this particular hour. Jane Ruby. Good evening, Jane. Thank you so much for hanging with us. Hang in there. We'll be with you momentarily as we close out that particular interview with Mr. Finchem, the representative from Arizona, who told us they're not too happy about the whole idea of seating Kelly. I think we're breaking news all over the place this week. First, we broke the news about the 5 soldiers confirmed by Major Valley and reconfirmed tonight by Representative Finchem. And as well, the possibility of not seating Kelly as senator from Arizona. There's a big possibility, ladies and gentlemen. People always ask Ken, you're on a roll tonight. Why are you stopping, man? I mean, this is great stuff. Why are you doing this? And it's very simple. I have to ask you 2 very, very important questions. Number 1, do you know where your children are? Number 2, do your children know where you are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?